Professor, this is your second book on Emperor Ashoka. So, what about Ashoka that appealed to you that you have written, the second?
The two books are very different.
Yes.
But I find Ashok to be a fascinating figure for a number of reasons. First of all, and for me that is really one of the most important reasons, he is the communicator par excellence of ancient India. If you think about Emperor Ashok putting up his edicts in public places, in places where people lived, along the routes which they traveled, along the places and around the places where they worshipped. I mean, it is just quite amazing. Usually when you think of kings and rulers engaging with their people, it is done in their palaces. It is done in, for example, in Mughal times in the Divaniyam, right? But where do you find an emperor who's actually moving around and also putting up his words in these public places? So that was the one thing which really I found fascinating. The second thing that I found amazing about him was that on the one hand, they're self-referential, his words. He's always talking about I and what he is doing and his work and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there's an interface there with the fact that he's not always successful. So, in his later edict, especially the last edict, he talks about two ways in which he has tried to get people to his path. One is through, diktat, and the other is through persuasion. And he admits that he's actually succeeded much more when it comes to persuasion. And that's amazing because so many of his edicts are like diktats. So, this interface with a man who is speaking about rulership and at the same time admitting that his rulership has limits and that his, outreach has been more successful when it has been in the persuasive mode rather than in the mode of diktat.
So, Professor, your second book is called Search for Ashoka from India, to Thailand. So, what was your data collection process like?
The data collection was through travel. I made a number of trips. I've been to different places in Thailand, in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka. And it's really like becoming an undergraduate again because this was something, I had never done. And it was an opportunity for me also not just to learn about Ashok, but also to engage with other cultures and to learn from them and to learn how memory can be very different from history. That is, the memorialized Ashok in these places is very different from the historical figure that is so central to my first endeavor, my first book, Ashok in Ancient India. After all of that, of course, you sit back and then you do go to libraries, to books, to a range of written resources to see what is it that you saw which can interface with what exists in these written sources. So it's a slow evolving process. And I began by thinking that, well, I'm interested in how he's remembered, but I've now come to the conclusion that he was very selectively remembered. So remembrance always is selective. And in the case of why you choose to remember one thing about Ashok as against another aspect of him has to do with the agendas of those who are, where Ashok figures in their cultures at that point in time.
Why do you think Ashoka should be studied in modern India or modern world?
Well, I actually think, Deepak, that he should be studied for a number of reasons. If you just read his edicts carefully, they seem quite modern. Even today, we always, especially, in the world of today, the question of how should rulers govern. Should fellow feeling and empathy have a role in governance, or should it be Kautilyan statecraft? Both come from ancient India. But these are questions that continue to figure, and they're very much there in the Ashokan edicts. Today, the largest question facing the world is the environmental question. And if you look at some of the edicts of Ashoka, there's a deep engagement with all living beings that is not killing, but not because of climate change and so on and so forth, and consuming meat, but out of compassion for other living beings. So, from a variety of perspectives, I think Emperor Ashoka should be studied because there's a lot that seems very modern. He may be a 3rd century BC ruler, but in many ways he seems to be quite modern. And if you think about, his edict where he talks about all religions engaging with each other in a public domain in a way that is cordial and not praising your religion and your doctrines over and above that of others. I mean, how relevant is that today?
So you have mentioned that there is a selective perception of Ashoka across the places you have visited. So are there any contradictions to what he was and what he is perceived of right now?
Yeah, they're completely different. Wherever you go, you will find a different Ashoka. So in Sri Lanka, the remembrance of Ashoka is much more the remembrance of his children. That is Sanghamitta, his daughter, who carried the Bodhi tree to Sri Lanka, and Mahinda, his son, who converted the contemporary of Ashoka, King Devanam to Buddhism. And on the other hand, if you look at Southeast Asia, the Ashoka that is remembered there is the creator of stupas and so on and so forth. And then if you think of the historical Ashoka, that part of him is there, but Sanghamitta and Mahinda are never mentioned in his inscriptions. And he does appear as a Buddhist in many of his inscriptions, but in the real body of his inscriptions, it is governance. It is a unique way of reaching out to people. It is replacing, military victories with, spiritual victories. All that figures. That doesn't occur at all in the remembrance of Ashoka. So there is not just a difference between the historical Ashoka and the remembered Ashoka. There's also a difference in the nature of remembrance across India and across other parts of Asia.
So what do you think, is there a lack of resources, or is it just, like Ashoka as an architect? There are people in Thailand, as you mentioned, they are remembering him as an architect or, as creator of these stupas, and there is a religion factor, and then there is governance. So is it that there is only selective resources available at that particular place, so he is perceived as that, or is there any other reason?
No, I think the reason is different. So if you are saying that, well, these stupas in our land were originally created by Emperor Ashoka, and then the king says that he is now renovating them. That's a way in which he establishes a link with the historical emperor. So you give yourself a lineage that goes back to the archetypal Buddhist emperor that was Emperor Ashoka. So it's not a lack of resources. You cherry pick what you want, and you do it because of your own reasons.
What is that one thing, Ashoka, the character of Ashoka, or something about Ashoka which is not known, through our history books that you have found out during this?
So I think one of the things, the remembrance of Ashoka, I think this is the first book on his afterlife. That is, my searching. that is this, book, Searching for Ashok. But I think looking at Ashok, I would say that I've actually looked at how his ideas evolved over time. So that is something new. I've tried to show that it's not just that Emperor Ashok changed as a human being, but his ideas also changed over time. So the Ashok who starts speaking in his minor rock edicts changes by, once 15 or 16 years pass, to a much more, he's an older man, he's more pragmatic and so on and so forth, and that is reflected. So I would say that is, something new. I think I've also shown how he's as much a king of Karnataka as he is of the north. So my book, Ashoka in Ancient India, actually begins in Andhra. So he has a very, very strong presence in that part of India. One shouldn't think of him only as a king based in Magadh and so on.
What is the motive or the purpose you're working on this subject or these personalities, who are from a different time period, and how does this help our learning process in the today's world?
Well, I work on what I'm interested in. So I don't look for a larger purpose in that sense. And Ashok, by the way, has not just fascinated me, but if you look at the writings on Emperor Ashok, there must be nearly 2,000 books and papers on him. So any historian worth her while of ancient India has actually written about Emperor Ashok at some point in time. So I'm part of that long lineage. But I think also Ashok has had a tremendous impact across India over time. Think of the first Prime Minister of India. What does he name his daughter? Indira Priyadarshini. So where is Priyadarshini coming from? What does Ashok call himself? Devanam Priyadarshi, right? And I think Nehru always saw himself, if you look at his writings, not explicitly but certainly implicitly, as the modern Ashok. So Ashok is not just there in dead and gone, but he was a living and palpable presence. And then if you think about our national symbol, it is the, Ashok Chakra. It comes from the Sarnath pillar capital. So it's not, I find him fascinating, as I said, for many reasons, but he also resonates in modern India because of figures like this.
Yes. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today, talking about the Emperor Ashoka, where our values were also based on the university values. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I hope, Ashokans read some of the chapters, at least, of my new book on Ashok.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.